Okay, so what I'm gonna do here is try to paint directly on the paper and mixing different colors right on the paper. So this is an experiment, and you're just gonna watch me do an exploration of something I've never done consciously before. I tend to do these things directly and not think about it too much, so I'm going to make it conscious for you right now. So I'm going to use limited palette. I chose this vibrant red. It's kind of fire engine sort of red. And then I'm going to also use an ultramarine, which is super classic. And we'll see where we go. So first thing I do is I just mix the two colors that I want to use like this, and then we're gonna have to make just enough puddle so that I don't have to keep mixing them while I'm painting. Okay, so that would be something like a strong tea consistency. Okay, all right, let's go. I have taken quite a lot of the pencil away, so I used this kneading eraser and I just press this down on the pencil, and what it does is it takes away the strength of the line and make them a little lighter, but yet you can still see them. So I have blue in my brush. So I'm going to start with the sky. So there's no real method to this, except I'm just going to plop it on loosely like this, and then I'm going to add just some water to it as I come down. Notice when I'm doing this, I'm actually also painting parts of the building roofs as well. And as this is still sort of drying, I'm cleaning my brush, and with the sort of fire engine red, I'm gonna just go down here and add a little bit of red just down here. So when I'm exploring, I don't necessarily know what I'm doing, but when I talk about it in a recording like this, it helps me verbalize what's happening. So now I'm back to the blue, and I'm going to just put the blue up in here, which is the roof of one of the building. And that's it. I'm back to the red again. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to plop the red color, just a very weak tea sort of consistency here. Basically most of this building I'm going to use it. And then while that's still wet, I'm going to go into the paint and add a lot more intensity to it. And then as I do this, I go again a second layer, but this time I'm just going to go on the front, on the side of this building, and I'm just going to let that all bleed through like that. And I'm going to go here as well. So notice all the blotches. I'm deliberately letting those happen. So what I'm going to do now is go on this side. Again, this is not thoughtful. This is just making your action conscious. The next time you do this, you will become more aware of what is happening. So that is still wet right there. Again, I'm now going to go into my blue, and I'm going to just push some of these red from this roof with the blue. So when you're experimenting like this, accept that some things might not go the way you want. So I'm gonna go back here, and while this is still wet, I'm adding this blue in this side of this building and also a little bit here. So when I do that, I maximize the bleed ability of the color underneath to help me move some of the paint on top. And it also clarifies that it makes it darker as well. So next, I think I'm going to mix both these colors right on the paper. So I'm going to do it on this building. So let me start with this mix of this color. And then immediately I'm just going to bring the blue into it. And I'm just going to brush the blue on top, right like this. So when I do that, you see how that it's mixing in parts of it and not mixing in some parts of it. I'm gonna now just leave this to be and let it dry. If I want a little bit darker on the bottom of the building, which it tends to be, I can push a little bit more blue on the bottom here and just stop right there and leave this. Now I'm going to put a little bit of, so my brush has both colors in it now, so I'm going to give that roof a little bit more color of that same mix. And then the roof up here is sort of reddish, so back to the red, clean your brush, back to the red up here. And this time I'm gonna just keep going down to the side of this building, and then while it's still wet, I'm gonna jump in with more intense color, but just here, and I'm gonna leave the bleeding happening. As I do this, I notice, oh yeah, this building here is also quite orange and intense, so let me do that while this is still wet. So now the second row, when I do this, I'm gonna try and avoid some of the windows. So I'm creating another shape within this building now, a little more intense, right? And then here also a little bit more intense on the side of this building. Okay, now I'm gonna repeat what's going on here back here. But this time I'm going to use, you see how I started with the red and added the blue? I'm going to start with the blue back here. Quite weak. And then I'm going to go all the way up the top to all these roofs. Right? And quickly I'm going to add the red on top of it. And let that happen. Whatever's gonna happen, I'm gonna leave that to dry. Notice I'm leaving a little bit of space. Some of it is just so that I don't touch too much of the edges. And finally, this whole roof area is quite dark, so I'm gonna kind of mix a little bit darker ultramarine blue, and I'm just going to put that there. And that is deliberately done. I kind of like the idea of those things doing that. So again, try to leave some white spaces in between in case I need it later. So as I do this, I'm always trying to go back to some of the dark areas and trying to add more color. Love that. Love that. I love how that bleeds to each other. It's looking pretty good. Okay, at this point, what you've got is quite a big mess, but that's okay. I'm gonna leave the street alone for now, and I'll come back to this when it dries. So now that everything is dried, this is what I call the ugly stage. This is where it looks quite terrible, but this is when we're gonna make it look amazing. So I'm gonna use 2 different pens, 0.4 and a 0.1. Alternately, we're gonna start with the thin one first. So looking at the reference, I'm just gonna trace off outlines. And when I do this, I'm also taking this as an opportunity to clean up and fix some of the lines that were maybe not that correct or wasn't accurately drawn before. At this point, I'm also trying not to be super rigid about it, but more trying to make it my own. What I mean by that is, yes, I'm looking at the reference. Yes, I am using the reference quite heavily, but I'm also making sure that I'm not too caught up in making the detail tip-top accurate. It's more of a free flow of how you feel. So notice how I'm using the pen like a pencil, trying to make it as broken as possible and not making the line perfect. This is very, very important, especially for cobble streets like this. You really don't want to make this super clean and too defined, because they just will not look natural. So there's also a little gutter on the side of the the buildings here where it's a little bit dark. And yeah. So I just kept using currently the thinnest point pen. So now I'm going to switch it up and go to the thick one. And here I'm trying not to spend too much time trying to be correct, but more going with the flow of how I am feeling. Sometimes this means being okay with taking a little shortcuts here and there, which is what I'm doing right now. So the only thing I'm going to do after this is I'm going to fix the background, because there's going to be some trees in the background here that we can play with using this big dagger brush, where I'm just going to mix a green that is actually very blue. What does that mean? I use sap green, which is nice and warm, which I think is too warm for the tree in the back. So I'm going to add a violet into that and darken it a lot, but it's still very green. And that to that I'm going to just use my dagger brush to create these kind of distant trees. So I am changing my tactic sometimes when I say, oh, I'm going to do limited palette. Yes, I am doing limited palette, except once I started going into the background, I will start changing that palette and adding some colors into that. However, the building sites and the architectures are all still very much a limited palette. We're just adding slight darkness in the gray, green background with just a little bit of purple, so that it cools it down a little bit. Notice I'm not being very accurate about it. That's currently what I decide to do. And this tower in the back. And now I'm going to go back to some ultramarine, and I'm gonna darken some parts of this roof with it, which, if you look at the reference, is quite dark. And I'm gonna intensify this blue right here. And now I'm going to mix that same blue, ultramarine blue, with a bit more violet purple. Currently, violet purple is my favorite color to add to almost everything. So I'm trying to get the the grayish color that is the road and the cobble. So I'm gonna mix a gray. To this blue and purple, I'm gonna mix a burnt umber. So it is quite dark brown, and this is the color that I'm going to use for the road. So notice with the brush, I'm trying to go with 4 or 5 brush strokes maximum to try and create the intensity and the sort of spontaneity of the street. So we're going to come back to this later to add more detail. So I am speeding up this process here just so you can see where and what I do the details. And adding white pen for window frames. And then back to black lines. So the next thing I'm doing here is to add in cobblestones, and they are just added in some parts of the drawing, but not all. So I'm not going to cover all this with this texture. I'm just suggesting that there are cobblestones on the street, and they are shaped vertically, they're shaped horizontally, so they're kind of going in this direction, so they are not round or circle, they're kind of oval shape and following the horizon line. So sometimes I do them in one continuous line like this, long continuous broken doodle lines, and sometimes it's individual little nuggets. So the key here is to make the shape of these cobblestone vertically, facing left and right, and not circular like this, but more like an oval shape or a cylinder. And you want to also make sure that they do not all look the same. They all have to be somewhat different sizes, different shapes. The better they will look when you make them more abstract. So sometimes the key to making a drawing less rigid is this: your ability to create texture that are so different from each other, that had a life of their own, and that adds quite a lot of interesting features and textures to the street. So I'm suggesting there are only some parts of the street that has the cobblestone, but not necessarily everywhere. Especially back here, I've done quite a lot, because if you look at the reference, there is a very dark shade of shadow coming through there. There is also on corners of houses is where you would put cobblestones as well, because you want to continue the line from the building all the way to the street. And that's it. After this, we're going to just go through one wash. So this is going to be quite a weak tea consistency of grayish blue or grayish brown. You can choose what gray tones, what biases you want on your gray. Sometimes you want it more brown, sometimes you want it more blue. This is absolutely up to you. So here is my current mix of the gray that I'm going to use. Now this is going to be finishing touches for shadows. So I'm going to shadow the back of the house here especially, and I'm going to bring that all the way up to the house as well. This is the key to adding a lot of dark, a lot of dark contrast to your street. This will make it really, really interesting and make it pop out. So most of the time I am going through just the edges of the building, further into the middle, but I'm also leaving some spaces in between because again, the cobblestones are quite uneven. So the more uneven you can make your shadow, the more texture you add to the street. And with the same mixture, I will add darkness to areas below roofs. They tend to be dark just under the roof here, under here, and definitely all this area under the roof will be dark. And the side of a building would be quite dark, just like this side of the building would be dark. Top of the building, under roofs, I would definitely add shadows, and as the building recedes to the back, I will add shadows there as well to the whole building. So for this sort of roof, it feels to me like I need a little bit more color. So I'm going to go back to some brick red, and I'm going to just add a little textural interest by just doing blotches instead of drawing the whole thing evenly. It will just not be as nice. So I'm just doing this, and there you are. We are almost done. Now what I'm going to do is just adding a little bit more sky. So the sky looks a bit strange with that strange line there. So I'm going to add a little bit of blue sky just here. So just imagine you are drawing the negative space of a sky, where you're drawing this blue sky with some patches of light clouds up the top. And the patches are deliberate, so it doesn't look so pale or so organized. And I'm going to go in slightly into the middle here to suggest there are skies under these, behind these trees. And that, my friends, is how I'm gonna stop with this one. The more I look at it, the more of course I can play around and adding more things, but I'm now gonna probably give this painting a rest. Hope you enjoyed that, and see you in the next one. Bye.